started here and just, well, it's 7:17. We can go ahead and get started now. So, hi everyone. I'm Barry Pickens. Yeah, one of the college counselors here at KCD. Thank you for joining us this evening for a spring college counseling workshop. We're joined tonight by Megan Starling, who's the director of admission at Rhodes College, fellow Kentuckian, who's going to be talking. Sorry, we live right by the airport, so here's like an airplane. So it'll be nice on reviewing this later on. But Megan's going to be talking about tips for a successful college search. So Megan, I'll give it to you, and then just a reminder to our families to please keep your microphone muted. And if you have any questions, to put them in the chat, and I'll kind of moderate as we go along.
All right, and I just hit present now to share my screen, right? Isn't that
Yes.
what I do?
Present now, and then you'll be given an option if you want to share a tab or if you want to share the whole screen.
Right. Okay. We can just. All right. Can y'all see that?
We can see that, and actually, if you hit, perfect. That's beautiful. Yeah, we can see it great.
Okay. I attended a trustee meeting yesterday, and no one that presented in the trustee meeting ever put their slides in presentation mode. And I was like, y'all, this is kind of a basic PowerPoint skill. So anyway, well, good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be joining you today. And let's see if I could see. Oh, yeah, I'm basically looking at my screen, so I can't so much see y'all. And I know you've got your cameras off, but if you've got questions, please make sure you enter them in the chat or what have you, so we can have as much of a conversation as you'd like. But I am the director of admission. I'm also an alum of Rhodes, and I'm a native of Lexington, Kentucky. So when I came back on staff about 11 years ago, I said, I will take Kentucky, please, and no one will ever take it from me. So it's my pleasure to get to work with Kentuckians who are looking at Rhodes. But beyond that, people in our industry love to provide guidance more broadly about how you can make your college search a successful one. So you'll get to look at pretty pictures of Rhodes all night, but I'm going to be talking from a more generalist lens, but happy to take Rhodes related questions either by email afterwards or during the presentation. All right, so tips for a successful college search. It's really important, I think, that you be advising your children on both picking the college, making that college list, but also simultaneously doing everything they can be to preparing themselves for college. The transition to college is a difficult one for even our brightest students. And so we certainly recommend that while you're identifying a college that is the right fit for you, you're also doing those things to make sure you're going to be ready when you get there. So we'll talk about both of those. And I think doing them in tandem helps ensure that when you reach your college home, it is truly going to be the best experience possible. So these are some things that we will talk about tonight: identifying your college experience, how to do some research and some of the resources that you can use. Again, how to make sure you're preparing yourself so that college that is the right fit for you is one that you're ready for. How to stay connected and be making sure that college is the right fit, even with limited opportunities to physically visit even still, and then completing that college search process. So first and foremost, particularly because I understand we've got sophomores and juniors, parents here tonight, too often I meet with students, even in the spring of their senior year, and I say, what is it that you're hoping your college experience includes? What do you want next semester to look like? And they haven't really thought through that. They have spent so much time worrying about the top colleges and universities in the country, and do I have what it takes to get in, and then navigating the application and figuring out financial aid awards. And none of this has really been about what they want in a college home. And that is certainly a search that leads to a lot of anxiety. It's about proving yourself all the time and less about making the college prove to you as the student or as the family that we are the best place for you. And I really would advocate that you sit down first and foremost as a family and form that kind of list of criteria about what the college experience should be for you. And so I've listed some things here that matter more than closet space, although the obsession with seeing residence halls when people visit is still a real thing. But these are some of the things to consider. Size of institution. And, you know, coming from a place like KCD, I work with students who have learned that the KCD environment, it's small classes, it's personal attention, it's very strong sense of community. It's relational experience where you feel like you know lots of people at the school. That they've identified that as how they learn best. So they want to continue into college with that kind of culture, obviously at a bigger scale, but that kind of culture. Conversely, I work with students at a place like KCD who say, I've done this small thing. I want to go to a ginormous school for a totally different experience. So what is it that you want? And don't be afraid to, don't be afraid to admit that you're going to learn best in one place or the other. I have one sister, she's younger than me. My whole college search included places like Rhodes, which is a population of about 2,000 students. My sister's entire search, all state schools, all giant, and we both had incredible college experiences. But we sat down first and figured out what we wanted. Location is something that we talk a lot about at Rhodes, and it can be interpreted a lot of different ways. We talk about location because we're in the heart of a major city. You know, your children have grown up in Louisville. They understand a city. They understand the resources, the diversity, the culture of a city. And for some, that matters in a college destination. For others, they want to experience something completely different. A rural college town, a place where everybody in the town knows the college students and kind of rallies around them, or something in between. But it could also be location like, I know that I don't handle cold weather well. You know, don't put schools in Maine on your list if you know that you're not a cold weather person. There's nothing wrong with using that as a criteria, because there are awesome schools that don't have cold weather all the time. And I think too often people think that's, you know, kind of a silly thing to put on your list, but this is ultimately going to be your home for 4 years, or your child's home for 4 years. And so those kinds of things aren't small in the long run, and figuring out what it is you want will keep you at the institution you choose, even when the first snowfall comes. Academic program is one that you have to be careful about in some ways. Finding or looking for colleges based on the strength of a specific academic program can be exactly what works for your family. And in other cases, you want to be careful because so many of our college students change their plan when they get to a college or university. So specialized programs like engineering, those kinds of programs can make a lot of sense to pick schools where engineering is not only an option, but a strength. But lots of other programs, I would encourage you to focus more on places that have a diversity of offerings or strength across the board, so that if that major changes, you're still in good shape. And there are options if the major needs to change. All right, questions about student life, role of athletics, depending on whether you want to play a sport or not. But also students have criteria about whether the weekend revolves around big athletic events. For some, that's a win. For some, it's not. Religious affiliation, and how much the campus emphasizes or even requires participation in certain religious activities versus a campus who really celebrates interfaith and has lots of different religious affiliations represented among its student body. And then certainly for some, as I mentioned with the dorm room, but, you know, facilities can matter, you know, a wellness center, an athletic facility, a student life building, being able to visualize how you're going to spend time. All of these things lead to a bottom line question that I think is always helpful to help characterize all of these things in one. Good days on my college campus will always include, and bad days will never include this. Build this list. There is a college or university, there are a handful of them, probably more, that will fit the description that you build. But it will be so much easier for your college counselors to advise you and for you to navigate the endless resources that exist out there if that list is already something that you have solidified. So once you've gotten to that place where you have a sense of what that college experience should look like, it's time to start doing the research and using the resources that you have. Even with COVID restrictions, there's almost more ways now than there ever have been, because so many of us on the college side have had to beef up our virtual engagement opportunities. So there's almost more ways to learn about us and kind of digest all of the opportunities available to you at these different campuses. I can't stress enough starting with the college counseling team that you have access to. If you've been a lifelong family at KCD, this may be something that you take for granted, but the vast majority of students in this country have no access to advisors whose job it is to understand colleges and universities, their culture, their acceptance rates, the programs they specialize in. And so you have a real resource here. The other thing is, they're not only going to help you build your list, but every college or university to which you apply is going to receive a recommendation letter that they have written. So the more that you really engage that relationship and get to know them, the more they can best represent you authentically and uniquely in your recommendation letter. So it really has a twofold benefit, but absolutely crafting that list along with your college counselors. The internet can be an overwhelming source of information, but there are several search engines out there that have worked really hard to develop algorithms that, you say you like one thing and they will say, oh, well, then you would probably also like this school and this school and this school. And it's a rabbit hole you can spend forever going down. But again, if you've got that list of criteria that you or your child is looking for, it can help make those search engines more easily navigated. Places like CapEx, Score, Naviance, there are a lot of them out there. Some where the data is pulled externally, where the college doesn't necessarily have control of it, and some where the colleges get to design their own pages. Additionally, once you have kind of a broad sense of some of the schools that you might be interested in, again, our websites are much more rich resources for ways to see our campus with more sophisticated virtual tours, ways to watch pre-recorded sessions. So maybe, this isn't a school you're sure about, but you've got a little bit of time on a Saturday morning, so you can sit down and enjoy a 30-minute session on some interest you have at the school, and it hasn't required this appointment and moving your calendar around. So using the school websites. I imagine some of you are getting some mail. We go back and forth a lot about how much physical mail matters. And generally speaking, we know that the parents will at least glance at it. And the email is just getting out of control and buried. So we're trying to navigate both waters. But colleges and universities are going to identify that the students that they think would be good fits. That doesn't mean that the student is admissible, but it means there's something that they have learned that suggests that the student is a good fit. And, we're trying to put our best foot forward with the mail and the email that we're sending. And occasionally, what we're sending will strike the right chord with what you're looking for. So it can be worth perusing those things. I do encourage in the email world that, and with phone numbers, we see a lot of families who end up using a parent's email address or phone number to send to provide to colleges. And that may work at the sophomore, junior year phase, but then the families don't change it when the student's a senior. So I'm texting, a student that I know is all about mock trial, and I've got a video on mock trial. And so I'm trying to text it to the student, and I've got the parent's cell phone number. So be careful that if you're providing email and cell phone numbers to colleges, that you're providing something that the student is ultimately going to have access to. And that would include, if the student has created a college-specific email account, making sure it's something they actually check. Because at some point down the road, maybe now it feels like it's just overwhelming and it's not necessarily tailored to their interests, but at some point that same college that's number one on their list is going to be using that email address to communicate some really important things. People like myself, we are here to be stewards of information about our colleges and universities, but also connection points to campus resources. So as I mentioned, a lot of us are wondering if we're going to get to enter high schools this fall. And even if we're not, we'll be providing virtual high school visits, which are not my favorite, but it does give a connection point. But then most of us are creating spaces where you can reach out to the admission counselor that works with students from KCD and either schedule a virtual conversation or join in regular kind of office hours that some of members of admission teams are offering to get some more information. And then finally, don't forget to use Kcd Alumni. There are students that have walked the halls with you and your children who were looking for very similar college homes and have been there, done that, and have some really good insight into exactly what it's like to go from the current educational environment to the one they're in. And I know KCD in the past has had alumni panels where students have shared some information about their search and what they did well and not well. But that's a really important, and their parents, those are all really important resources. And at a place like Rhodes, we love to get referrals from alumni and their parents. In fact, that's how we'll end up finding some folks. You don't want to, in creating this list, and this is especially relevant this year if you've followed the headlines with so much test optional activity and the application boom at highly selective and Ivy League institutions this year, where students learned that testing wasn't going to be, maybe they looked at the academic profile of an institution and they thought, yeah, that sounds like me, except that I have a 28 on the ACT, which is a fine score, but an Ivy League institution does not put you in really admissible range. So this year we had a lot more students who kind of leveled up in their college search and were shooting for the moon because testing wasn't a thing. We're seeing a lot of waitlist activity, in part because colleges and universities were overwhelmed with the number of applications they received. And so one of the things you'll be working with your college counselors to create, given that the expectations you have for your college experience, a balanced list that even if test scores are not something they require, that really includes schools where you have a comfortable shot at admission, schools that are a bit of a reach, or maybe a place that is typically admits an academic profile that's not exactly what you have demonstrated, though you have probably some other skills and qualities that they would definitely want. And some schools that are going to be a sure thing. You want a balanced list, and that applies to finances as well. Too often we have students who don't consider how important a role finances will play in their future college home. And they successfully get into lots of institutions, but have applied to institutions that don't meet full need or don't award merit scholarships, or for whatever reason, there isn't an option that was balanced in terms of financial access. Now, I understand before this, there was a presentation on visiting, so I won't cover that in any great detail. except to say that once the research is done, once the resources are accessed, actual visits of the campuses that you've somewhat narrowed your list to are pretty important. And there are a couple of different ways. Well, there's lots of different ways to experience a campus, including some in-person visits, but also virtual visits across the board, regardless of whether you can or want to travel at this point. All right, so any questions before we shift into making sure you're prepared? That's kind of the building the list.
I just think that photograph of the boys in the back seat is hilarious. That's terrific.
Yes, Rhodes is fortunate in that we have, and maybe they're twins, and this is going to be me in a few years, but Rhodes is fortunate that we're across the street from the Memphis Zoo. Mm-hmm. So back when there used to be college visits that were really very family road trips, if there were younger siblings, typically one of the parents might take the kids to the zoo while the other parent got the clearly more exciting option, which is to visit Rhodes. So
I do have one question for you, Megan.
Sure.
Now, and I apologize for it's like the birds in the backyard here. So you had mentioned the difference between contacting a student versus contacting a parent. You know, if a student had left a parent, is that something that colleges pay attention to? Would you rather hear from students over parents, or like how do you feel about contacting a student versus a parent?
Yeah. So at some point in the cycle, now, especially for our admitted seniors, we have programming that is targeted at parents. So, but by the time you apply, or by the time your child applies, we're going to get, although some of this is changing on the Common App, but we're getting some parent-dedicated communication or parent-dedicated like email and phone numbers. So if we have information that we want the parents themselves to know, we're going to target that to what we understand to be your contact information. But most of the time, particularly in the search, we're really looking and we're targeting our admission materials toward the appetite and what we think the interests of a student would be. And I think, sometimes parents use their own information, I guess, thinking that it's going to be too much and the students won't filter through it, and maybe you'll have time to do that. But then, like I say, often it doesn't get changed. And then we're trying to send very student-specific information that gets to the parent. Generally, in reaching out and requesting information, requesting interviews or time to meet virtually, we would prefer to hear from the student. Though sometimes, again, at this time of year, there are some questions that, especially financial related, that pertain more to the parent. So it really depends, but we emphasize that this is the student search, and the more work the parent does, often the less, either sometimes the student isn't as invested, or we find that, the college fit feels more similar to what the parent assumed the student wanted, or the parent thought the student wanted, rather than, the child actually choosing this based on their own interests.
Great.
All right. So these are some of the things that your children can be focusing on alongside the search for the college home that will ensure that successful transition, but also help make sure that in that balanced college list that you've created, that truly you've got schools on there that make sense, because these are the pieces that the colleges and universities are going to look at to determine admissibility. And even with the shift to test optional, it hasn't changed the many pieces, the many facets of the student story that we care about and pay attention to. It may have shifted the emphasis that we put on different pieces, but the pieces were always there and we were always paying attention to them. So starting with the academic program, this is at the top of the list because it is the most important. And this academic year has proven that for sure, given that so many of us are not using a test score. So that is considering the rigor offered at KCD. To what extent has a student pursued rigor that would be in line with what the college or university is looking for? And this is another great question to ask of both admission counselors, but also your college counselor. Some students' lists, their future colleges and universities don't require as much rigor. Sometimes they will require rigor in very specific subjects. Again, coming back to engineering, if you're looking at good engineering programs, then they care that you have taken the highest level classes in certain math and science subjects. If you're shooting for Ivy Leagues, they're going to care that you've taken the most rigor in every subject. So again, you're building your list kind of in tandem with the way that you have pursued your academic program and finding that right fit. Performance comes as we look at your GPA, but also your place in class. And rank is something we rarely get. There are a lot of public schools that will rank, but generally most schools, including KCD, give us a sense of where within the class, broadly speaking, this academic performance fell. We're less interested in knowing that you're number 15 in the class and more interested in knowing you're in the top quarter or you're in the top 50%. And that gives us a sense because we've got historic data about generally who has been successful in transitioning to a place like Rhodes, given that academic performance. And it does make a difference the more selective the school is and the more you're in search for scholarship money. Potential, a lot of colleges were relying on SAT and ACT scores for potential. In the test optional movement, there were many of us that named test optional for several years to come. Some schools just did it for 1 year, and it remains to be seen as they're making announcements for the upcoming year. But generally speaking, it's a great question to ask how test optional is truly applied at the colleges and universities that you were looking. Some truly mean it's not necessary. Some will be looking for it for the best scholarships. And that's a good question to ask. But potential, we've had to translate or find it in other ways, largely the recommendation letters and certainly some of what the transcript is suggesting to us. This is my favorite part of the application. This is one of the reasons that I work at a place where we have 2,000 students. We really get to know students and their full story in the admission process. And outside of all the things we do during, the search meeting with students, the personality of a student really comes through in their application itself. So these are some of the ways that a student has a chance to demonstrate to the college just their uniqueness as a 17-year-old. And it's one of the things that recommendation letters will try and get at as well. And last but not least would be extracurricular activities, which I know is arguably more a source of stress for junior parents right now than maybe even our current senior parents, because there has been a greater pause right in the middle of your children's high school experience where they would really be digging into some of these activities. Colleges and universities know that. We're going to have to figure out how we navigate that. But the good news is no one is in that boat alone. Sports seasons, arts productions, big campus events, the capabilities that student governments had. I mean, that's been a limitation across the board. What we are interested in is what were you able to do? How did you spend your time, even if some of your preferred activities weren't a possibility? All right, kind of wrapping up here, remembering to stay connected, which is something that is actually more possible than ever. Demonstrated interest, which used to be something we talked a lot about, is not as much, we don't talk about it in the same way that we used to. We are not looking to see before we admit a student, have they visited? It's not a fair assessment of their interest at this point, but there are lots of other ways, including through virtual engagement, for not just for us to learn that somebody is interested in our college, but for them to learn more about us. Demonstrated interest in its altered form is and especially for sophomores, is very much a relevant question for the colleges and universities on the list you're building, because there are going to be some that a successful college search for that college or university really requires some form of interest. And there are going to be others that couldn't care less. Vanderbilt is 3 hours down the road from us. You could literally camp in the front yard of the admission office for your entire senior year, and it would not affect your ability to be admitted. That would be creepy at a place like Rhodes, but we would take note of the great effort you went through to show us your interest. So it's a reasonable question, and one we'll probably get back to, but we're all using it in different forms right now. I've already kind of talked about making sure that, especially once you build your list, you're staying connected through the emails and the texts and calls that colleges are sending your way. And once a school falls off the list, make sure you reach out and say, I would like to withdraw my inquiry, my application, so that those things stop. And the ones that you're actually getting are from the colleges and universities that you're truly interested in. That will help your search remain more focused and for you to be able to be actually engaged with the schools that stay on the list through the end. Interviews, conversations, both with people like me and also community members, are still very much a great way to access the opportunities at a campus and make sure that you are making sure your story is told, but also learning how the criteria that you came up with in the beginning, how a college can address and match those interests. And like I say, that includes not just me, but saying to me, I'm really interested in international studies. Could you connect me with a student who is majoring in that right now? I want to study abroad. I want to play a sport. I want to be involved in the arts. And asking us to make sure you're getting connected to those students. And so even if you can't visit, you can have virtual conversations or be texting with a current student and understand the campus a little better. Finally, make sure that once you have picked your college home, part of a successful college search is letting all the other colleges and universities know that you found your college home, and it's not that one. It is a really important part of the process for us. It helps us learn where our students are ultimately going, which informs our practices in the future. But it also ensures that all those emails and phone calls and texts will come to an end, which is arguably the most important thing. All right. And I will take any questions that y'all have.
Megan, you mentioned students receiving a lot of mail and emails from colleges. I was actually in class today, was subbing for a teacher. It was a sophomore English class, and they're like, Mr. Picken, we're getting so many emails from schools that we've never even heard of before. So I know that process is starting definitely for sophomores. Do you have any advice for families who are trying to find distinct characteristics colleges that on paper kind of all look the same or similar?
If I had the big answer here, then I think I could make a whole lot of money in our industry. Because one of the things that we try and do at Rhodes is make sure that the emails, the mailings that we send you do highlight what we think is distinctive about us, so that when you open it, it does jump out to you as, this is a place that looks different from the others. But I'll be honest, I don't know that any of us have the secret formula. I think it comes down to, I would plan to dedicate some time, particularly in that 10th, 11th grade cycle, where you you sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to go through this inbox. You know, maybe you're using your regular email and you move all college emails to a folder and spend one Saturday or Sunday afternoon going through, actually open them and see what speaks to you. Because I think at the end of the day, they're the ones that have, you're going to know what you're looking for. And I don't always know what's going to resonate with a student, but when you see it, you know it. You just got to give yourself the time to look. And I think that's not always something you can do after school on a Thursday, but maybe you can put them all in a folder and say, today's my day to sit down and I'm going to take the list that I've made with my college counselor. I'm going to look at the emails that seem valuable to me and I'm going to see where there's intersection. Yeah, I would argue the list building part should be the most intensive part of this search. Because from there, then it's fun to say, these are the schools that for whatever reason meet my expectations. And now I'm going to dig in and learn more about you. But you got to invest the time on the front end, with that search and that research part.
I love too the part of your slide where you said good days always and bad days never. That's great. I'm definitely stealing that. That's a great
go for it. Go for it.
You know?
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that then you can use how you have divided those questions when you talk to people like me, when you talk to your tour guides and say, I want to make sure that I always have access to this, or I want to make sure that my school is going to guarantee I can study abroad. Does your school offer that? And you got to be willing to say no to it if it doesn't meet that expectation.
Yeah. Well, Megan, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry now I'm in the middle of the London Blitz here in my backyard, but I do appreciate very much you taking the time on this Thursday night to speak with us. So
Absolutely.
I will. Yeah, if parents have extra questions, of course you can reach out to me or Mr. Easley. But thank you again so much for chatting with us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And my email is starlingm@rhodes.edu, but Mr. Pickett or Mr. Easley could share it I invite additional discussion to anything that I've brought up, or if you do want to learn more about Rhodes College itself. But I wish y'all the best. You're going to get through this and you're going to find an awesome fit for you and your family.
And good luck in July.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Right.